Okay, now that we've talked about the hotbox, let's talk about the Hypershade render perspective. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my original sphere, select all the other extra polygons and things I've made, and just hit the delete key on my keyboard to delete them. And I'm going to, in my channel editor, I'm going to actually change my values for translate to 0, 0, and 0 so that it's actually right in the middle of my universe again. And you can also hit F to frame it. Now it'll spin around that particular object. It basically centers the camera around that object as well when you hit F to frame it. So what is the Hypershade render perspective? Let's check it out. You will need a bigger monitor. This is really hard to do on your laptop. Not possible, but it's hard to do on a smaller screen. Not impossible, I should say, but it's hard to do on a smaller screen. So hold down the space bar to bring your hotbox. So with my hotbox down in my north marking menu, I'm going to click on my mouse. Just left mouse button is fine. You can also do right mouse button. They'll both work. I know I mentioned right mouse button only because that's how it used to work back in the days, if I can remember, but both mouse buttons work for this. So Hypershade render perspective. And again, when you select that, it might take a while. I preloaded mine because it does take a while if you do it for the first time. So just let your computer think. And once it loads up, this is what you're seeing. You're going to see a material viewer. These are the materials or shaders that will, they're shaders that comprise the material that will make our object the texture or the material or both that we want. And then this is your actual Hypershade and your render window. And any of these windows you can mouse over and tap and basically blow that area up to make it bigger, just like any other window pane. So here's the thing about Maya, if you haven't figured out already, everything is treated like a window where you can basically tap on the window and blow that up. And what I mean by blowing that up is basically making it bigger. So I'm going to go back to my Hypershade. And now what I want to do is just go over the Hypershade panel and this area right here. So let's blow that up for now. We'll start off with this window here. This window here lists all the materials on your scene. So this will be all of the initial materials that you select from here. And by default, Maya has a gray Lambert assigned to it, a kind of just default glow, and a shader glow, and a standard um, surface default thing. So we're not going to really worry about these other three, but I want to look at the Lambert 1 shader. Now, if you select any of these, you'll notice that my options in the channel editor is changing. But with these nodes, or these shader nodes, I don't really need my channel editor. I need my attribute editor. So I'm going to hit Control A to get to my attribute editor. What that does is it shows me the attributes of each of these materials. And you can change things like color, transparency, ambient, incandescent, etc., etc. But warning, do not change anything in Lambert 1. This is the default. This is what defines the gray color of any object that you create initially. So that's why it's gray, because our Lambert 1, which is the initial default Lambert that Maya uses, is set to gray. So don't touch that. What we're going to do is really add our own because we need to do it anyway. So um, what we're going to do is throw out a Lambert, and if you just, again, if you expand this, if you can't expand it or you can't see this whole list, under create, there's all your materials and shaders and things here. So what we're going to frequently use in our tutorials are Lambert, Phong, and maybe anisotropic. But all of these have amazing properties and they are all customizable, and you can basically use them to create your own texture. So what I'm going to do is throw out the Lambert texture first by just clicking on it. You just click it once, because if you click it a bunch of times, it'll create a bunch of nodes. So you just click it once. I'm going to undo that. And the immediate thing that you should do, just best practices, is right mouse button and rename. So you can right mouse button over that shade and rename it. Or the other, a little bit more easier is really just clicking on it and going to your Lambert 2 options and calling it something like, because I'm going to put it on that sphere, so I'm going to call it Sphere Lam for Lambert. And hit enter, and that will change the name of the node. Now, the cool thing is these things are all nodes that are plugging into this main shader. And we can see that one of two ways. And again, I want to stress each thing in Maya you can see. And there's several different ways of doing the same thing in Maya. It just gives you easier ways of doing it or your preferred ways. Now, sometimes I end up using all three different ways because it's just easier or depending on what I'm trying to do. So in order to see the connections, you can also always, kind of see it in this window. But if you select a material or anything from this group here, and if you go right mouse button, graph network, what it will do is graph neatly all of the nodes that are plugging in into your Lambert shader. So all of the things that's going to make up your material here that's called Sphere Lam. And if you notice here, these things correspond with these options here in the attribute editor. So basically you can plug it in by node through here, or you can create a node by clicking on this checkered box next to each of the options. So to create a node, you click on this checkered box. And a node is essentially whatever that object will be defined by. So what we're going to do is, we're going to take our sphere Lambert, and I'm just going to change the color first. So I'll just change it to something like this crimson red, maybe a little bit lighter. So I've changed this color only of my material, but my ball is still gray. You know why? It's because this is plugged into this. In order to basically assign a material to your object, you're going to select your object, and then you want to go over the specific shader that you want to apply that object to, and right mouse button, go to that north side where it says, well, hold your right mouse button down over the material shader, and then select Assign Material to Selection. And what that will do is take the selected object that you've selected. This only works with a mesh, by the way, polygon or surfaces. It doesn't work with lines and things like that. So we select that, right mouse button, hold that down, and hit Assign Material to Selection. Now that ball is been applied with that sphere Lambert shader. Now, if you want to change anything, we can just select this and go into our settings. We can change the transparency. By default, it's opaque, so black equals opaque. White equals transparent. Ambient color, don't ever change that, but ambient color is just the natural color that it's giving off. You want to, unless you know what you're doing, you want to leave it at black. Incandescent color is the glow, if you will. It's not really a glow, but the color that it's giving off. And you can select an incandescent color. It'll look really bad, but you can select an incandescent color, and like that is the color that it's giving off. So I'm actually going to change it back to black. We'll discuss bump mapping, diffuse, translucency in future tutorials, but diffuse, again, in terms of lighting, it's just a way that light is broken up and bent and spread out using when it hits a material. So the most obvious diffusers you all have probably been used to or have seen are basically lampshades and things like that. Those are diffusing the light that's giving off the lamp. Translucency and translucent depth and focus work in conjunction to create a translucent material, or to give your material some kind of translucency. Now, the best way to kind of envision translucency is if you ever hit your if you've ever shined a flashlight right on the palm of your hands, and you can kind of see that, your skin at the edges are somewhat transparent, or translucent is actually what it's called, not transparent. Um, some other examples of translucency are like the wings on a fly or a wings on a butterfly. Um, um, well, butterflies have a certain translucency versus the wings on a bee and wings on a butterfly, but those kind of things are translucent elements. And there's a lot more that actually literally will take a whole entire semester to just get, understanding, just to get knee deep into it. But these are the ones that we're going to focus on for our purposes. And again, they are here. And to move around in your network. So once I graph my network, it's graphed here. And to move around, it's just like how you move around in any other window. Hold down Alt, right mouse button click to zoom in and out, middle mouse button to move around. And of course, you can't tumble around because we're seeing this in 2D view. This gets more complicated as you're working with additional things, so I'm not going to go too deep into the working with nodes here, but just know that once you create a node, it'll here by using the checkered option, it'll show up here as a node that's plugging into the color. And if you want to get an idea of that, we're going to create our first node by going to the color, clicking on the checkered box option next to the color. This is, by the way, the official name is the create node button. So we're going to click on that checkered box or the create render node option. And under here, it's giving us a bunch of different options. What I really want to do is just kind of show you the basics. So I'm going to select checker. And what that's going to do is make my Lambert sphere. And also, you can zoom in and out the same way here as well. But this is my sphere. And notice that this is by the way, it gives you representation on a object, on a polygon object, just so you can get an idea of how it will look. It gives you a representation on a sphere in the materials area, so you can get an idea of how it looks. And finally, what I was saying, this is the node that created. It created a 2D place texture node, and this is the 2D texture, that checkered texture. This defines the UV coordinates, and again, you'll be doing the UV assignment, so you'll know the UV coordinate and what that is. And it plugs into the color option or the color node. So that's how it is being defined. And if we look at our object, you'll see that it is textured with the black and white checkered option. But there's no texture here. So why not? Let's look at that. Let's talk about your numbers again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the keyboard on the top. If you hit the number 1, which your object selected, it'll basically take you to the regular wireframe view. If you hit number 2, it'll take you to like a smooth view. 3, shaded view, smooth view with that's editable. And again, this is a sphere, so it's not going to make that much sense right now. But what I'm really trying to get at is number 4, which will show you the wireframe view. Number 5, which is your regular shaded display. And number 6, which is your texture map displays. Number 6 is what will allow you to see whatever texture has been applied to your object. So when we had just the color, it showed up because it was just basically a shade. So number 5 worked. But as soon as we applied that texture, that shade no longer was a shade, it just became a texture because we applied that texture node here for the color, and that's what made it a texture. So for your UV tutorial assignment, you're going to actually just create a node, but that node is going to be a texture file. By the way, once you create a node, how do you get rid of it? There's a couple of ways. The easiest way is to take your Hypershade and just draw a thing around it, draw a marquee selection around it, and hit the delete key. It's gone. And then you have to basically redefine the color again. Notice that it shows up. So that's the easiest way to delete it. Another way to delete it is to simply just take your sphere, go here to the word color, right mouse button, and hold that mouse button down to the right option or the attribute that you want to get rid of your node. In this case, it's the color, so I'm going to right mouse button over the color, word color, and I'm going to hit break connection. And that's basically, it keeps your node, but it breaks the connection so that your node no longer is taking the checkered texture from here because we've broken the connection. And the reason I broke that connection is because I just want to real quickly go over how you can add a file. Same way you create render node. Instead of selecting one of these options, you go here and select file. And what that will do is basically make a mess out of your objects here, but don't worry about it. And I'm just going to, again, go here, graph network, and that will graph everything within that network. And what happens is once you do that, it may or may not take you to the place where you need to post or attach the file. You can do this again through your network here. This is where you have to click, and then under that, it will show you file 1. And again, you can rename this. And so what I'm going to do is rename this sphere image, hit enter. And under file attributes, you see that thing here, empty box that says image name. Click on that folder next to the empty box, and you can basically select an image. I'm going to select this brick image I have, hit open, and see how that's applied now here and in my sphere, and probably in my sphere model as well. Now this came in nicely UV textured, which is excellent. It rarely happens, but somehow it's happening. But in the UV texture map tutorial, you'll figure out how to create your own projection maps and work with that. So that's, again, easy ways to just real quickly get working with texture. If you just quickly want to see what is going to get quote unquote captured, like so basically turning on your viewfinder, go to the word view under your perspective camera or camera panel, go to camera settings, and turn on resolution gate. And what that will do is basically show you the resolution. This is just whatever Maya's default is. We'll change that later. It'll show you the resolution and kind of just give you like this viewfinder so you can frame your objects. We need to go to our render settings. So let's go to this thing with the gear on it, the clapboard with the gear. That'll bring up our render settings. And I just want to make sure that my perspective camera is selected. Yes, it is. Okay, so one other thing, I don't like Arnold render. We're going to set this to Maya software, hit close, and now hit render, and there it is. So that's a real quick way of just kind of getting textures on your images and a start to what you will be doing in the UV texture mapping tutorial.